We don't know yet whether the Shrinky-Dinks will make it into the Marvel stable of characters. More importantly, it's time now to introduce you to one more character at this meeting, the man in the sunglasses, a creative supervisor without whom everything we've just shown you and the history of comic books in general would be a far, far different story. His name is Stan Lee, and before he helped revolutionize the comic book industry 25 years ago, he had labored for 20 years before that as a writer and editor at Timely Comics, the predecessor of Marvel. These are the types of comics Stan Lee was writing in those early years, from romances to westerns, keeping teams of artists busy drawing the books at the prodigious rate of 2 per week.
Was there ever a time early in your career then when you go to a cocktail party and somebody would ask you, well, what do you do? And you'd have to say, oh, I write comic books, or...
Yes.
Really?
Yes, very often in the early days, before Marvel. I'd be at a party with my wife and somebody would come over, and just as you say, what do you do? And I'd get a little bit nervous and I'd say, well, I'm a writer. And they'd say, oh, really? What do you write? Well, I still had a couple of options. I'd say, I write magazine stories. And I'd start to walk away, but what magazines? Well, I still had a chance, and I would say, well, children's magazines. Which ones? At some point, I was pinned down, and it had to be comic books. And then, oh, I see, and they drift away.
To make things worse, the General Motors of the comic industry at that time was a rival company, DC Comics, which had a corner on the superhero market with Superman and Batman. Then, in 1960, Stan Lee was asked to create a superhero team for his company, which would publish the story as the first Marvel comic. His idea of what superheroes should be, embodied in a group called the Fantastic Four, would redefine the form.
Before the Marvel superheroes, the superheroes you read about really never had to worry about making a living. Women always were in love with them. They didn't have to worry about getting dates. They were always pushing the girls away. They didn't have to worry about acne or dandruff or fallen arches or anything like that.
So in the Fantastic Four, 2 of the main characters constantly bickered at each other. And Stan Lee went on to create Spider-Man, a superhero who was also worried about how to get a high-paying job.
Now, if you can do the same thing in front of the lights and cameras, you'll have it made.
The Incredible Hulk, a kind of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde hero. The Silver Surfer, who frequently agonized uncertainly over the state of humankind. And others like Thor, God of Thunder, and Doctor Strange. Arthur Berger, who teaches a course in pop culture at San Francisco State University, says that Marvel roster of heroes added a new dimension to the problems of how to cope if you have superpowers.
When Stan Lee started writing, we started getting neurotic characters, we started getting characters who were ambivalent about certain things, characters who had psychological problems. We started getting social problems being put into the comic strips and so forth. So you got a much more interesting and well-developed type of characterization. I think that's a big innovation that he made.
But how did that approach stack up against the tried and true DC comic heroes like Superman and Batman? Well, this team of reviewers gives Marvel the thumbs up.
Marvel is more like realistic. DC sort of, you know, they have invincible superheroes who never die, they're always there, and they had like one death, where Marvel sort of shocks the world, where people die and everything, like they have all, it's more like real.
It's more real.
It's more believable.
Feel the emotions of the characters, like you can.
It's better.
Really
and like
care about them.
DC is kind of like cliche.
Cliche. The
like,
villains.
They all have their cape and everything. This looks like a job for Superman.
It's cliche.
And if you look at Stan Lee's work, for example, or many other works, you find that there's some pretty interesting stuff going on in terms of ethics, morality, sense of obligation to society, that kind of stuff.